I'm Peggy Peck at the American College of Cardiology meeting in Atlanta. Stroke is a major public health issue in the United States, and one of the major risk factors for stroke is atrial fibrillation, a condition that has proved somewhat of a clinical challenge. I'm talking today with Dr. Ralph Brindis, who is the president of the American College of Cardiology, and let's start with atrial fibrillation. It's been a clinical management challenge for years. Talk a little bit about this treatment challenge in the United States.
Well, thanks. It really is a treatment challenge both for patients and physicians alike. In the United States now there's probably over 2.5 million people with atrial fibrillation, and as you point out, a major risk for stroke. And our population is aging, and atrial fibrillation is a disease of the elderly, so that number is only going to increase. We know from evidence-based guidelines and based on randomized clinical trials that the best way that we can minimize the risk of stroke in patients with chronic atrial fibrillation who have significant risk factors is through the use of anticoagulation. And the drug that we've had to date, of course, our workhorse, is warfarin.
So warfarin has been around for a long time, for decades, but it's a difficult drug, isn't it, in terms of administering it with patients? It
is. You know, in all honesty, warfarin, of course, is rat poison given in controlled doses. But it has a bunch of unique properties that makes it difficult to manage. There's a lot of drug-drug interactions. The way it's protein bound in the blood means that the therapeutic index, that is the amount of warfarin that's necessary to have therapeutic anticoagulation, is narrow, and the risk of being over-anticoagulated or undercoagulated is quite high. So this requires the patient to come in for frequent blood checks, and of course, if they don't, the risk of excessive bleeding.
So it's interesting that for years people have been looking for the new warfarin, something to replace warfarin. Today, actually, right here at ACC, we've heard a little bit preliminary data on a new factor 10A inhibitor, betrixaban, and this was reported today at a late-breaking clinical trial session. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about these findings.
Well, thanks. You know, again, I think that a lot of people appreciate the need for finding an alternative anticoagulant, and so there's been a lot of attention on factor 10A inhibitors. The drug presented today has some unique properties. One, it can be given once a day. It's orally administered, and it has another unique property in that it is not excreted particularly by the kidney, and therefore it probably will be very safe in patients who have impaired renal function. It looks like it doesn't have a liver toxicity. There was some concern of GI side effects. We learned about nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea, but evidently not enough that led to discontinuation. Now, this study, of course, was not a real large study. It was really a dose-finding study looking at 3 different doses, and is also assessing safety and modest efficacy. But it looks like a promising drug in that it seemed to be safe, and it seemed to be efficacious compared to warfarin.
Now, it's interesting to me that this news comes here today, and it's created a bit of a stir because it follows on the heels of a trial that was reported at the European Society of Cardiology and published at the same time in the New England Journal, and that, of course, is the RELY trial, and I think there's even subsequent analyses of those data here at this meeting. That looks at yet another alternative to warfarin. That's a direct thrombin inhibitor, and that's dabigatran. And I know, I spoke to you in Barcelona, you were very impressed with that. So are we in a new age? Are we entering the post-warfarin era, do you think?
I actually think that we are. Of course, the FDA hasn't yet approved dabigatran, but what's very interesting of that particular drug is it didn't show equivalence. It actually showed improved efficacy with no increase in bleeding. Typically, you would think a drug that has that's more efficacious would come at increased bleeding risk. And so what was so exciting about the RELY trial is that it did not seem to have increased bleeding risk. So that's very exciting drug, and clearly manufacturers of new agents related to the 10As appreciated that the bar may indeed have been raised.
Also interesting that the same researcher, Dr. Eskowitz, reported the data in Barcelona and again here. So I find that I found that interesting. That,
well, it just shows you what a great authority is, but it may be at the end of the day, you know, I don't have that crystal ball, but it may be at the end of the day that there's certain drugs based on patients' clinical profiles, whether, you know, renal disease or whatever, that one drug may be better in that subgroup, may be the preferred choice than others. We heard some tantalizing, or I would say a teasing piece of information related to today's presentation, in that they have the concept of, in process of development of a reversible agent for the drug. In other words, if somebody is having a bleeding problem, you can give intravenously a direct reversing agent that would immediately counteract the anticoagulant potential. Well, that would be huge in somebody who's actually bleeding, because presently, if we have somebody actively bleeding on these anticoagulants, we have to give fresh frozen plasma. It takes hours to give, and we may be able to minimize the risk of somebody who's severely bleeding with a direct agent that can reverse such effects, but obviously this is still in development.
That's for betrixaban, the antidote. It's being developed in a parallel, it's part of the development program. And Dr. Eskowitz did say that the antidote has not had, they have no human experience with that. So it's intriguing, but we're probably looking at something that's way down the line. Way down the line. Well, Dr. Brindis, I want to thank you so much. You've been very helpful and very generous in sharing your time with us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
In Atlanta, at the American College of Cardiology meeting for MedPage Today InFocus, I'm Peggy Peck.